She was just 7 years old, cold, alone, and sitting on a bench. Most people walked by. But when a millionaire CEO stopped, everything changed. What he said next. You won't believe it. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Stop here. The driver glanced back in surprise, but he knew better than to question his boss. With a gentle tap on the brakes, the sleek black SUV pulled over to the curb, its tires hissing on the wet pavement. David Langston, the 45-year-old CEO of Langston Tech, unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door, letting a gust of cold wind and rain slap him in the face. Sir, the driver asked hesitantly, but David was already out that he jogged the few steps to the bus stop, water splashing beneath his expensive leather shoes. The girl didn't look up. Her small shoulders were hunched forward, her thin arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if trying to disappear into the soaked sweater she wore. Her light brown hair was plastered to her forehead, her jeans clinging to her legs. She looked like a ghost, fragile, forgotten, and lost in a city too busy to notice her. David crouched beside her. Hey, he said gently. The girl flinched, eyes wide, lips trembling. She looked up at him with a mixture of fear and confusion. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. It's okay, David said softly. I'm not going to hurt you. Are you alone? She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Where are your parents? He asked. Her mouth moved, but again, no sound came. Then finally, she whispered, Gone. That one word hit David like a punch to the chest. He took a breath, blinking rain from his eyes. What's your name? Amy, she whispered. Well, Amy, he said, offering a warm smile. Would it be okay if you came with me? I can help. We can get you warm, dry, maybe something to eat. She didn't answer, just stared at him, her small hands clutching the frayed straps of her backpack. David gently held out his hand. I promise you're safe. For a moment, he thought she'd refuse. But then, slowly, cautiously, Amy placed her freezing hand in his. It was so small, so cold, it nearly broke his heart. He led her carefully to the SUV. The driver raised an eyebrow but opened the door. Amy climbed in quietly, her wide eyes darting around the luxury interior. David took off his coat and draped it over her tiny shoulders. It swallowed her whole, but she pulled it tightly around herself and gave the faintest smile. Take us home, David said to his driver. The ride was silent for a while. Amy stared out the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. David sat beside her, trying not to overwhelm her with questions. He could feel his phone vibrating. Emails, messages, missed calls. But none of it mattered right now. Back at David's penthouse apartment, a maid opened the door, eyes widening at the sight of the soaking child beside her boss. Can you help her get cleaned up? He asked gently. Warm clothes, maybe something soft. And tea, if we have any. Of course, Mr. Langston, the maid said, already guiding Amy inside. As the girl disappeared down the hallway, David stood still for a moment, water dripping from his hair, shoes soaked, heart racing. What had just happened? He'd spent his life climbing the ladder, chasing success, money, prestige. He ran a company worth billions, gave keynote speeches, appeared on magazine covers. But none of it had prepared him for the look in that little girl's eyes. An hour later, Amy emerged in a fluffy robe, hair towel dried, cheeks a little pinker. She looked less like a ghost now. She clutched a cup of tea in both hands and hesitated in the doorway until David motioned her over. Feeling better? He asked. She nodded. Do you have anywhere to go? He asked carefully. Again, that small shake of her head. He exhaled. All right, then you can stay here. Just for a while, until we figure things out. Is that okay with you? Amy's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back and nodded again. It was a small gesture. But it was everything. David didn't know what the next steps would be, how to contact social services, what the legal process would involve, what this would mean for his carefully structured life. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All he knew was that he'd stopped. He'd seen her, and maybe, just maybe, he was finally beginning to understand what it meant to truly make a difference. The driver looked confused but obeyed, pulling the sleek SUV to the curb. He watched in the rearview mirror as his sharply dressed boss, CEO of one of the city's most powerful tech firms, stepped out into the pouring rain without a word of explanation. David Langston's polished leather shoes splashed into a shallow puddle, soaking through within seconds. His tailored coat clung to him under the relentless downpour, but he didn't even flinch. His eyes were fixed on the little girl curled up on the broken bench at the bus stop. Trembling and drenched, he approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Hey, little one, are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, kind. The girl looked up, startled. Her big brown eyes were wide, her face pale and streaked with raindrops, or maybe tears. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her thin frame was wrapped in a soaked sweater, and her backpack sagged on her shoulders. One strap nearly ripped through. "I'm just waiting for the bus," she said in a small voice, her lips trembling from the cold. David crouched down to her level, ignoring the rain pooling around his knees. "Where are your parents?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "My mom's gone," she whispered. "My dad's trying to find work. I wait here every day so I can walk with him home after his shift. But today, I think he's late." Her words hit David like a punch to the chest. The child's voice was so quiet, but it held a weight far beyond her years. He remembered, all too well, the gnawing uncertainty of waiting for someone who might not come. He had lived that once, too. There were a million things he could have done in that moment. He could have called the police. He could have handed her a few dollars or told someone else to handle it. Or he could have simply walked away, like everyone else did. That would have been easy, but something stopped him, something deep and buried. A memory of cold nights, of hungry days, of a scared boy sitting on a curb while the world rushed past. That he couldn't do it. Not this time. David took a deep breath, then knelt fully beside her, his voice steady and calm. "Come with me," he said. "Let's get you warm and safe. Just for a little while, until your dad shows up." "Okay." The girl's eyes searched his face, uncertain. "You're not gonna take me away, are you?" "No," he said firmly. "I just want to help." She looked down at her soaked shoes, thinking. Then, slowly, she gave the smallest nod. David reached out his hand. She hesitated, then took it. Her tiny fingers were ice cold in his. He helped her stand, shielding her as best he could from the rain with his coat. The driver quickly stepped out and opened the car door, his expression tight with concern but silent. The girl slid into the warm leather seat, still clutching her backpack tightly. David got in beside her and closed the door, the storm sealed. Off behind them, the sudden warmth of the SUV wrapped around her like a blanket. "What's your name?" David asked gently as the driver pulled away from the curb. "Ava," she said quietly. "Ava Marie." "Well, Ava Marie," he said with a soft smile. "You're safe now." She glanced up at him, still unsure, still shivering. But something in her eyes shifted, a flicker of trust. They drove in silence for a while. The only sounds were the soft hum of the engine and the rain tapping against the windows. David handed her a towel from the back seat. She took it gratefully and began drying her hands and face. When they reached David's apartment building, a sleek, glass high-rise in the center of the city, Ava's eyes widened. It looked like a castle from where she came. Inside, the warmth and light of the lobby made her blink. A doorman greeted them with a surprised nod, but David didn't explain. He simply led her upstairs, his hand steady on her shoulder. The moment they stepped into his penthouse, he handed her a soft blanket and called for his housekeeper. "Can you find some dry clothes for her? And maybe something warm to eat?" he asked. The woman nodded and gently led Ava down the hall. David stood still for a moment in the foyer, drenched and silent. His phone buzzed again and again. Meetings, deadlines, conference calls. But none of it mattered now. All that mattered was the soaked little girl who had been sitting alone at a bus stop, and the quiet decision to do something about it. Sometimes, the smallest moment changes everything. And for David Langston, this was that moment. At first, she hesitated. Her small frame trembled, half from the cold, half from uncertainty. The world had never been particularly kind to Lena. Grown-ups were often too busy, too distracted, or too angry. But there was something different about this man. There was something kind in David's eyes. And more than that, there was something about the way he said, "Come with me," that didn't feel like a command. That it felt like a promise. Yes, oh, she nodded. Barely. And let him take her hand. He opened the car door and gently helped her inside, easing her into the warm leather seat. The heat was already running, and it wrapped around her like a hug. She blinked a few times, trying to make sense of the soft interior, the polished wood trim, the smell of fresh leather. It was nothing like the cold apartment she shared with her father. David climbed in beside her and took off his coat. Without a second thought, he draped it over her narrow shoulders. It hung down past her knees, but she pulled it tight and sank into the warmth. The coat smelled faintly of cologne and rain. It was the safest she had felt in a long time. Not the office. David told the driver quietly, "Take us to Maple and Elm Cafe." The driver nodded and merged back into traffic. It wasn't far. The cafe was tucked away on a quieter street, a little place with ivy in the windows and warm lighting inside. David had been coming there for years. The owners knew him by name and never made a fuss when he wanted privacy. When they arrived, he led Lena inside, a hand gently on her back. The bell above the door jingled softly, and the smell of fresh bread and roasted coffee greeted them. That a barista behind the counter glanced up and smiled. "Morning, Mr. Langston. Usual table, please." David nodded, glancing meaningfully toward Lena. The staff understood. No questions asked. They sat at a booth near the back, beneath a framed photo of the city skyline. David helped her out of his coat, revealing her still damp sweater and ragged backpack. She looked so small in the oversized seat, like a bird caught in the storm. That he ordered her a hot chocolate, a grilled cheese sandwich, and a bowl of tomato soup. She stared at the mug as it was placed in front of her, steam curling into the air. She touched it cautiously, as though afraid it might vanish. "Go ahead," David said gently. She took a sip, then another. Then, as the warmth spread through her, she began nibbling on the sandwich, her eyes occasionally darting up to study him. David didn't push her. He let the silence linger, let her set the pace. Finally, he asked, "What's your name?" "Lena," she whispered, voice barely above the hum of the cafe. He smiled softly. "That's a beautiful name." She nodded, chewing slowly. "And where do you live?" She paused, then rattled off an address. It was across town, in a part of the city David rarely visited anymore, a neighborhood that had seen better days. He made a mental note. Bit by bit, as the food disappeared in her fingers regained their color, Lena began to speak more. Quietly, cautiously, like someone used to being listened to. "My mom died last year," she said. David looked up from his coffee. "I'm so sorry. She got sick. Real fast. One day she just didn't wake up." Lena kept her eyes on her plate, her voice flat like she was repeating a memory she'd learned to survive. That David's chest tightened. "My dad works a lot now. 2 jobs. Sometimes 3. He tries, but," she hesitated. "Sometimes we don't have dinner. He tells me to eat first." David swallowed hard, his throat thick. "I wait for him at the bus stop," she continued, "so I can walk him home. He says it makes him feel better, like he's not so alone." She glanced up then, almost apologetically. "But today he didn't come. Maybe he's stuck. Maybe he forgot." David nodded slowly, trying to keep his voice even. "That's very brave of you, Lena, and very kind." She didn't answer, just looked back down. And in that moment, David Langston, man of status, fortune, and influence, felt utterly powerless in a way he hadn't in decades. For all his success, he couldn't erase the pain etched into this little girl's story. But maybe, just maybe, he could help write a new chapter. "I'm going to make sure you get home safely," he said gently. "And I'm going to check on your dad too. But first, let's finish that soup, all right?" Lena nodded again. And for the first time, she gave him a small, tentative smile. It was all the answer he needed. David couldn't get Lena out of his mind. Not that night. Not the next day. He barely touched his dinner. And for the first time in years, he ignored his overflowing inbox. Her small voice echoed in his memory. The way she held that mug of hot chocolate like it was the most precious thing in the world. The way she said, "My dad tells me to eat first." Something inside him had shifted. Business meetings suddenly felt trivial. Quarterly reports and tech forecasts paled in comparison to the image of a little girl sitting alone in the rain, waiting for a father who was just trying to survive that he couldn't forget. And so, he didn't. The following evening, after making a few discreet inquiries, David found himself standing in the back alley behind a noisy downtown restaurant. A narrow metal door swung open, letting out a burst of clattering dishes and shouting from the kitchen. Inside, He spotted him. Lena's father, early 40s, maybe younger, though he looked older. His shoulders were hunched, his uniform stained, hands raw from scrubbing. The man didn't notice David at first, too busy washing plates, his movements mechanical with exhaustion. "Excuse me," David said gently, stepping forward. The man turned around, startled. His eyes darted toward the manager, then back to David, unsure what kind of trouble was coming his way. "I'm not here about the restaurant," David said quickly. I'm here about your daughter, Lena." The man froze, his expression tightening. "She's okay, right? Did something happen?" David raised both hands. "She's fine. I met her yesterday. She was alone at the bus stop. I stopped, talked to her, bought her some lunch. That's all. He paused, searching for the right words. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay, and to ask if there's anything I can do to help." Lena's father straightened, shoulders stiffening. "We don't need charity." "It's not charity," David said quietly. "It's humanity." The man looked at him for a long time, studied him. The kind of long, silent look that poor men give rich men, trying to find the catch, the judgment, the pity hidden behind the polished words. But David wasn't offering pity. He was offering something else entirely. Over the next few days, David didn't just help Lena's family. He made a promise to children like her, all across the city. He called a meeting with his top advisors, his legal team, and a few friends who owed him favors in City Hall. He told them he was starting a new foundation, something personal, something urgent, and he named it the Lena Project at first. The room was filled with confusion. Why divert time and money from the company's flagship initiatives? Why chase something with no return on investment? David looked them in the eye and said, "Because I can, and because I should." The Lena Project grew quickly. He poured his own money into it, millions, without blinking. It began with a simple goal: ensure that no child would ever have to wait alone in the rain for a parent who couldn't afford to be on time. The program launched community vans that provided safe and reliable transport for children in low-income neighborhoods. It offered free hot meals in after-school centers, tutoring programs run by volunteers, and mentorship from professionals in every field, from tech to teaching to trade work. That IT wasn't just about charity. It was about opportunity, dignity, hope. And one of the first people David hired was Lena's father. He brought him into one of the company's facilities as a logistics assistant. Nothing flashy, but steady work, consistent hours, and full benefits. Enough to cover rent, food, and maybe even a future. When David handed him the offer letter, the man looked stunned. "I don't know what to say," he murmured, voice thick. David smiled. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Never miss another walk home with your daughter." Tears welled in the man's eyes. He nodded, speechless. A few days later, David visited their apartment. It was still small, still humble, but brighter. Somehow, Lena ran to the door when she saw him, her face lighting up. "You came back," she beamed. He knelt down to hug her. "Of course I did. How's the soup at home now?" She giggled. "Not as good as the cafe." David laughed. "Well, we'll have to fix that." And in that moment, surrounded by chipped paint, mismatched furniture, and the quiet joy of a little girl who finally felt seen, David realized something he hadn't felt in years: purpose, real, unshakable purpose. And he knew this was just the beginning. A few months later, Lena stepped through the tall glass doors of a brand new community center, its name etched in bold silver lettering above the entrance. The Lena Project, Eastside Family Resource Center. She stood still for a moment, blinking in wonder. The lobby was filled with light, sunlight streaming through wide windows, colorful murals on the walls painted by local artists and children. Laughter echoed down the hallways. Somewhere, a piano played softly, and the smell of fresh bread drifted in from the cafeteria. Kids her age were everywhere, playing board games, reading in cozy nooks, painting at long art tables. Some were doing homework with volunteer tutors. Others were just eating, their plates piled high with warm food. And every single one of them wore something Lena had once gone without: safety. Her eyes lit up. She hadn't just been invited here. This was her place now. A place where kids like her didn't have to pretend they were fine. A place where no one had to wait alone in the rain. Across the room, David Langston stood with one hand in his pocket, smiling as he watched her take it all in. That he was no longer the polished, distant CEO people once feared in boardrooms. There was a warmth in his eyes now, a quiet peace that hadn't been there before. A softness earned not through success, but through connection. Lena caught sight of him and ran over, throwing her arms around him without hesitation. He knelt to return the hug, and for a second, the noise of the center faded away. It was just them again, the little girl on the bench and the man who stopped. Nearby, a reporter from the city paper stood with a notepad, watching the scene with curiosity. She stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Mr. Langston," she asked, "this center, this entire foundation, you've invested millions. You've changed lives. But why? Why do all this?" David looked at Lena, who was now chatting animatedly with a group of kids near the book corner, her eyes dancing with joy. Then he turned back to the reporter and said, simply, "Because no child should ever be invisible. Not on my watch." His words were quiet, but they landed like thunder. The reporter blinked, stunned into silence for a moment. Then she lowered the microphone and nodded respectfully. But David was already looking back at the center. This place wasn't just about food and clothes. It was about dignity. It was about showing children that they mattered, that they were seen, heard, and loved. And it wasn't just this center, either. In just a few short months, the Lena Project had launched 6 more across the city, with plans for 10 more by the following year. Each one bore the name of a different child helped by the foundation. Each one was a promise. And Lena, well, she wasn't just the first. She was the heart of it. She had gone from shivering on a rainy bench to leading story time every Tuesday. From being quiet and unsure to standing up in front of other kids and saying, "You're not alone." I used to feel that way too. David watched her from across the room, pride welling in his chest. Not the kind of pride that came from awards or wealth, but the deeper kind. The kind that came from doing something that truly mattered. He remembered that rainy morning with clarity. The splash of tires, the blur of umbrellas, the way she had hugged her arms around herself like the world had forgotten her. And he remembered the 2 words that changed everything. "Stop here." Words he had said without thinking. Words spoken, not from duty, but from something deeper, a part of himself he had nearly forgotten. A part that remembered cold nights, missed meals, and what it felt like to be invisible. That moment hadn't just changed Lena's life, that it had changed his. He no longer measured success in stock prices or app launches. He measured it in smiles, in warm meals, in backpacks filled with books instead of worries. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light through the windows, David Langston sat in a chair near the edge of the room. He watched as Lena helped another child find a jacket from the donation wall, gently wrapping it around the younger girl's shoulders. In that moment, he saw something even more powerful than charity. He saw a legacy. All because one day, in the middle of a storm, he stopped, looked, and said, "Come with me." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring real-life stories that remind us of the goodness still left in the world. Sparkling Heart. Every week, we bring you powerful moments that show how a single act of kindness can change a life. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes, all it takes is a little love and the courage to say, "Come with me." See you in the next story.